I think you should ask Palestinians their druthers before you just announce that we are all Palestinians. Now, it may seem sometimes when I dispute Owen Jones, Brian Eno, George Galloway, Weaponized News, and so on as sandbaggers, that there's some sort of push and shove back and forth between friends of the family. It is actually very serious what's going on. Reagan knew what Israel was planning, and the sandbaggers, all of them, defend Reagan's idea of Mount Desert Island as a substantial contribution to redeeming the spirit of John Lennon in the AIDS catastrophe. They support what Reagan did, and they do it by saying he was moved to represent the spirit foundation of John Lennon and Yoko Ono in a circus of crime that made me into a convenient thing to hate, as Magna Cum Thaws, the Israeli of Pittsburgh, put it, from his status as Magna Cum Laude from a college up towards Boston. And the reason we know that this was planned is because it goes back in cinema to the dawn of cinema. For example, in 1951 in Storm Warning, Reagan presents himself as an independent and idealistic practicing district attorney in conflict with the Ku Klux Klan. The film uses the image of the burning cross for excitement, but the historic fact is that Reagan had a long partnership with the people responsible for the first use of the burning cross in association with the KKK. D.W. Griffith and Raoul Walsh, the latter of whom made Dangerous Journey with Reagan, in which he encrypts pro-Hitler messagings, played the same game that the sandbaggers are playing. Watching the dialogue box, you get the message about Kennedy, about mob bloodthirst, good blonde Germans who stood to the side and allowed evil to happen, a digest about crowd capabilities and flash mobs, a parallel character who actually explains the mirror being used by Reagan to represent himself through an act of ventriloquism. And lastly, his ideas of revenge, which follow the pattern of a better idea or getting revenge by what you would call taking my turn. In other words, it's Israel's turn. And they use the symbolism that's found of eugenic. That was then, this is now, a changing of the guards that is found in Diva, in the script by Gail Burstyn, and in the Telltale clip. It's also found in Peter Gabriel's production, the way he came sizzling at a neuroplasm with a Yimmer from Senegal and brought in Midori Goto, the violinist, to put the little boy into seizures as the black man went off with the presidency. This was a Donald Trump production by David Jeffen and Yoko Ono for the promotion of Barack Obama. When you look at what's happening in Gaza now, you're talking about a rival syndicate who promoted Kamala Harris, who completely ignored the genocide in Gaza. And the situation with AIDS was a parallel situation that the sandbaggers allowed to happen. I was hollering about Israel getting revenge for Auschwitz and Carnegie Mellon University newspapers in 1994. Not only did they ignore me, they went along with the storm warning and said that Reagan didn't know when he was central planner. A parallel situation um, to complement storm warning. In fact, two do. One begins with the name Zell and the other with the consonant Zell, as in Zelensky. Supporters of the Zio Banderas labored that there was a contradiction between Jews and Nazis to hotwire around what Israel is doing. Likewise, Zell on Mount Desert Island, with the blessing of the sandbaggers, represented Reagan's team during the AIDS attack, claiming to be performing a service for Miles Kirshner and the Jewish Defense League. This took my form, turning of the tail. That was then, this is now. As symbolized eugenically by the face-to-face meeting of the two women in storm warning after the trial, and other imagery that you can find in the film of the semiotics that trace back to the turn of the 20th century. This plan of Lenin-Sudini goes a long way back. Of course, the more that you show the evidence, the more the entire thing becomes a lampoon and a satire in the hands and minds of the sandbaggers, because Lenin-Sudini was the toppling of media for the purposes of entertainment, control of the world. It was mind control. Lenin-Sudini was plain and simple mind control. I've taken on this labor without reward and call for peer review and further research. I think it is clearly an issue of our times. I do not personally believe in any such thing as a cold genocide, which is what the sandbaggers have fallen into position to justify. In other words, the Holocaust of the Jews was uncool. The AIDS attack by the ARC Confederacy was cool. And what's happening in genocide in Gaza is uncool, according to the sandbaggers. I don't think any genocide is cool. And to just repeat, Miles Kirshner was the attorney who put together for people like King Crimson the idea that I was obsessing over Leslie Katz's virginity. He also was the source of the dangerous narcotics that had led to a neuroplastic trauma with the help, and was helping the watt makers. So he was in the DC crowd, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and he steered me into Washington, D.C. the night that before Hinckley shot James Brady. Reagan was clearly Hollywood. The FEMA brochure reads there's no such thing as objective reality, only what the jury believes. What the jury believes in is that Lenin-Sudini was mind control. You're not allowed to believe what really happened. Therefore, you will never see the other evidence. Lenin, they say, died, and the Svengali pendulum hypnotizes you, so you do not see the warning about Israel getting revenge for Auschwitz in 1994. You do not see the symbolism and semiotics in 1951 film Storm Warning. You do not see the pattern between Peter Gabriel's So and the guerrilla theater operation by Donahue and their death squad, which brought me to Tacoma under the heel of Seattle's civics. I was recently poisoned in my eyes. I wish it would stop. I went to court trying to get a mandamus, but the sandbaggers on a roll. They never stop, and they're not about to stop for the sake of argument, to assess the situation and look honestly at the evidence that Lenin was involved in this all along, of which there is plenty to show and speak for. So it's difficult to get by the political opposition. Political opposition is extremely wily. I tried to write something today which could help somebody try to prevent further serious harm from befalling me because of my research. But of course, that's an invitation because they say you must trust or you will pay the penalty for not trusting. So it's conditioned um, annexation of genocide in Gaza by the sandbaggers who allowed the cool genocide to happen. So I will find and read you what today, although it is not likely to persuade these tools of Reagan, of whom I mean Owen Jones and George Galloway. More likely, George Galloway will understand when he sees the evidence in Owen Jones, who has staked his name to the idea he can recant, but he really should recant the idea that Reagan was better when it came to the Israelis, which is just a sandbagger defense of the Beatles. Although it's not likely to persuade these tools of Reagan that Lenin pulled off a Houdini farewell. It's not to be lost in return they vaporized the history of what this satyr to Paul McCartney actually pulled off as well. If you take a look at what belief Lenin died was used for, I believe, which I used to believe, you will see it was used to bring us to this catastrophe without tears as a Hollywood great leap forward.